Good evening, everyone. Zachary Epps, co-chair of the Policy Committee, officially calling our January 24th, 2023 meeting to order. To start off, I will take roll call, starting with committee members. Ms. Jenny Lum.
Here.
Mrs. Julie Haywood.
Present.
Mr. Joel Fishbein, attendance at the moment. And we also have board member, Mr. Charles Burdell Williams, joining us tonight. All right, with that, with roll call, I'll hand it over to administration. If anyone is following along, we do have new business. Oh, yeah, minutes. Apologies, thanks for that. I'll await a motion to approve last meeting's minutes, which is actually from November 29th, 2022.
So moved. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. And that would be unanimous pass. Thank you for the reminder. At that point, I'll pass it over to administration to take us through what is new business only for tonight.
Yes, we are discussing the special ed policies tonight. There are 4 listed for discussion. We have Andy Foss here, our special ed attorney guru, who will explain the policies and be able to answer questions. I will share my screen. So we can begin with the first policy, which is 113, special education. Originally posted and adopted in 2009. So Andy, you just want to give us a...
This is a standard or a version of a standard PSBA recommended policy. Actually, legally, we're not required to have a general special education policy. State Department of Education, when they do monitoring of schools, expects districts to have only 2 policies. And one of those is governing positive behavior support for students with disabilities. The other governs independent educational evaluations. The policy group that we're going to be reviewing tonight includes that language. This policy, which is just a general capitulation of what federal and state law require, very broadly stated, is unnecessary, but most districts choose to have this sort of statement to affirm to the public that they adhere to federal law. We worry a little bit sometimes when we attempt through a policy this brief to summarize the vast expanse of federal law, layered with state law, very complex, and you risk either underrepresenting what the law requires and looking like you're not committed to it all, or overstating what the law requires and committing us to do more than what the federal statutes and regulations already require. I have made only modest requirements to this change, really just slight rewording changes. For example, right at the beginning is a statement that describes in broad terms what the least restrictive environment mandate of federal law requires. The recommended policy, it said that it was largely to serve the purpose of allowing kids to have access to the general curriculum. In fact, the least restrictive environment is also access to regular classroom environments, extracurricular activities, and other things of that sort. I thought it was worth adding that, so we expanded the language slightly. There was also a rather lengthy section of this policy that's been deleted altogether, which governs recording of meetings. You already have a limitation on recording policy in general, and that's where it belongs. It should not be in a special ed regulation, making it look like we put limitations on parents recording special ed meetings that we don't put on the rest of the public when they access our schools. So we simply recommended shifting that language to your other policies that restrict recording in school premises.
Did anyone have any questions regarding the policy 113?
Start board members. Is that a You looked over, okay, no, did you want to? Okay, I read into it a little much. It looked like there was something coming. Okay, Mr. Sabler.
Yes, I have a couple of questions. Thank you, Mr. Bass, for sharing that information about this policy and how we formulated these policies, just as our standard policies for special ed education. For the delegation of responsibilities, and maybe this is a Dr. Scriven question, it basically says that we're required to annually recommend for the employment and retention of necessary qualified staff, provision of required facilities, etc., services provided for the needs of students with disabilities. And I guess my question probably directly to Dr. Scriven is, do you know, I mean, I know that we normally get at all of our meetings kind of a list of individuals that we are approving, not well, indirectly. But is there a way that we identify those individuals specifically that are dedicated to the special education program in our district?
I'm gonna defer to Adrian on that.
So I'm not sure, can you say, ask me anything?
Yeah, so the basic question is, because this policy requires us to approve as a board the staff that support the special education program within our district. The question is, I know we normally at every meeting get a list of individuals to approve for either retaining or hiring. But is there a defined list of staff that we approve as a board that are identified to support the special education program? I don't recall.
No,
That's-
not that I'm aware of. Not a separate list. Everyone obviously is included on the board agenda, and a separate list for just special ed. Not aware of that.
Although you do, on I think it's a 6-year basis, are required to revise your special education plan, which is submitted to the state. 3 years, excuse me, thank you, Allison. Every 3 years. So every 3 years, the board is looking at a plan that doesn't by name, but by position identify every position the district employs and every position the district uses from other providers like the IU. So that in that sense, it's all sort of brought together on that triennial basis.
Okay. And I'm assuming that may not necessarily address the annual recommendations to the board. So just asking the question, if there's another way that we would, if that's required, if there's another way that that information could be provided to them for our approval. Does that make sense?
It makes sense. I'm gonna have to do some research before I don't want to try to answer that now. So we can look into what that would look like. And whenever you guys pose questions like that, I always like to see what other districts are doing around that area as well. So
I was going to offer that. This is pro forma language that appears in the PSBA policy. So I would bet that many of your sister districts have this. I will tell you that it is very rare to see a special ed specific list of employees by name. So I'm not sure you're going to find that many of your fellow districts are actually doing this despite its presence in the policy.
And if it's not required, it may not be required, I'm not
Right.
sure. And if the comprehensive plan actually addresses that, I'm fine with that. I just was curious in terms of what we do, because I don't recall that we've gotten a specific list.
I'll definitely look into it.
Okay. And then kind of in that same delegation of responsibility section, there is language that says, we will evaluate the effectiveness of our district special education plan and report that criteria to the board with the results of the evaluation. Is that basically incorporated or expect to be incorporated in the comprehensive plan?
Yes, there's a process that the Department of Education asks us to go through. Again, on that triennial basis, we're supposed to make the plan available to the public. The board is supposed to review the plan and vote on it in public. So it's usually in that process that every 3 years at least, we are sort of revisiting how we structure special ed in the district.
Those are my only two questions.
Oh.
Thank you for those questions. I actually had the same, those are two of the things that I was wondering about as well. Particularly the procedures for evaluating effectiveness of district special education and reporting periodically to the board on that plan. And maybe that's what we've sort of been doing when we would get a report from Dr. Gallagher in December, which was kind of the state of affairs in special ed, perhaps, I guess. Out of that, but yeah, I did have that question as well. But a couple of since Mr. Cohen isn't here, I'm going to channel a few. Once you get them, a couple commas, a couple consistencies with the capitalization of districts, either capitalized or not capitalized. Need to make, there's a couple times where it was capitalized, times where it wasn't. I don't know what you want to do with that word, but capitalized or not. I can give you these later, Zachary, if that's not helpful. So, yeah, I don't go through all these little commas and stuff, but
You want to share it with me?
would that be okay?
Yes.
Okay.
Ed, I can talk to Ed.
Ed can do, okay, yeah, all right.
Forward right on over.
Okay.
Ed promised me I would not be responsible for
Okay.
it. Out
Yeah, and then there are a couple things that just was thinking, because I was thinking of what you had identified as like the issue with kind of doing a general policy, which is ensuring that we're accurate, but not too wordy, but not, So I think under the purpose, the district shall offer each eligible student with disability. Maybe that goes without saying, but makes me feel better if we have eligible in. Or
to distinguish that from a student with a disability who hadn't been determined eligible.
yes. I don't know, that's just a thought. And then
If I could, just Jenny, while you're on that, just so to point out, there is a definitional section that appears below that preface that does define student with disability to include basically those students who have been determined eligible. Who are
yes.
entitled under state law to a free, public education, and have been evaluated and determined to meet the disability categories. So I don't know whether you think it would, you
Yeah.
still need that clarification.
I don't
up
know.
top or not.
I just put that out there. It's just the word of me. Yeah.
You do that. don't you?
But it doesn't matter really me one way or the other. That's just one of the things that I just thought about. And then on the right above the delegation of responsibility, there's 3 paragraphs above it under authorities. That the board shall determine the facilities, programs, services, and staff that shall be provided by the district for instruction of students with disabilities. I'm not sure how we do that, or does that simply by us approving the special ed plan, we determine the facilities, program, services, staff?
Yeah, this is one of these PSBA standards. You see this for probably if you went through all 900 sections, they do that over and over again with pretty much every operation in the district. In fact, operationally, this is what you do. You vote on the hiring of special education teachers, the opening of classes. Last year, you voted on bringing some of your programs back from the IU. So piece by piece, every month, you are taking actions that build or deconstruct your special ed program.
Okay, I just, for me, I feel like the word determine, I think, is what I'm stuck on. I was thinking maybe we could say the board shall approve. That's really what we're doing. We're approving what the administration is.
Yeah, I don't have any objection to that. Since
It makes sense. It does define, yes,
Yeah.
you're absolutely not wed to this.
Okay.
This is language that's being suggested by the School Boards Association.
Yeah, definitely approve. Really make more sense to me.
Now, describe what you're really doing.
Yeah.
That's-
We don't. No.
Because we have the authority to, and we've given that authority over to the superintendent to do it, but technically we have the authority to determine it. So as a policy, I'm not the lawyer at the table, but as a policy, I do wonder, and this is in semantics, but I do wonder if we do, as is, it's appropriate. We've just vested this authority in the superintendent and others who kind of carry it out. That was my take on it, what I read.
I think I'm in line more with what Jenny's saying, because we don't really determine what those programs are. We take the recommendations of the administration, and then we approve those facilities, programs, and services. So I would probably be more comfortable with approving. We don't really determine.
I think as a description of internal procedure, it's accurate. If this district is challenged legally, it's challenged for what it has determined. The inanimate object that is the district has determined that this is what special ed programs shall be. And then we're judged based on that. Nobody looks at an individual. You know, Jenny Lowen, did you determine that the program would be that way? It's the board that's presumed to have done so, but it really doesn't matter in the policy whether you use one or the other.
It's semantics to me. It looks like we have two members who are saying, let's explore it in the least. So that's, and that would be our consensus argument.
Yeah, I would even venture to say if we just use a diagonal and put determine, diagonal, approve. Because I do see the governance component of it, as you're working in conjunction with supporting what we're trying to operationalize, right? So let us play with that. And
Okay. So
is this, and I don't want to be out of, are we doing this as first, where are we in the process with these policies? First read.
Moving forward to
These are, right, these are discussion
Okay.
tonight,
All right.
and then, from here, the next meeting will be a first read, so we
Okay.
still have another opportunity
Okay,
to review these policies.
all right, so we'll try to bring back something that hopefully we're all
Thank you. That was all I really had for that one. Thank you.
All right, do we have any members of the public? I see something in the Q&A. Or two. Yes,
Yeah, we do. Kristen asked, can she speak a little? Hi, can you all speak up a little?
Okay, speak up a little. Okay.
Kristen,
Well,
I
can you
guess having
confirm-
trouble hearing us. Cherie Pickney, when are we going to have actual trained RBTs, registered behavior technicians, be hired to support our children who need one-to-one support documented in the IEP? Currently, Wincote does not employ BHTs, which is an issue.
I would offer that question too.
It would be,
I don't know if you.
I have members from the team here. Did you guys hear the question?
Yes,
If you can shed any light on that, it would be appreciated.
so, I would say, this is Allison Cooper, Supervisor of Special Education. I would say if we had a need to explore where a child may require an RBT, that we would talk about that as an IEP team and decide how to go from there.
Thank you. And as a matter of record, if you could identify where in the community you reside, when you add your question, that would help us. We need that for the record. And so appreciate it. And if the audio, I'm not sure if the mics were picking up essentially, and if you want to join us at the table, you sure can. But hopefully that response, if anyone's having audio issues, please let us know. Our director did respond in terms of really making a one-on-one assessment when that RBT would be needed as part of the IEP.
Correct.
I should say the Department of Education does not recognize a distinction between a certified behavior analyst and an RBT. There is a single position that is recognized now for certification, which is behavior specialist. And the district does employ board certified behavior analysts who satisfy TDE's criteria.
So we have an additional question from Yvonne Duava. I'm saying that right, Howard? And Devon identified that she's from Wincote. Regarding evaluating the special ed program, is there a specific evaluation document that quantifies the varied programs rather than a board evaluation? Second, who conducts the evaluation? And lastly, also, are those evaluation prompts and data available to the public?
So the question is, how do we go about evaluating our special ed program holistically?
That appears to.
And we can also unmute, folks, if you've typed in your question, we can also unmute in our committee meetings. It's a bit more conversational, we hope. And so we can also unmute you if you need to clarify your question or would even like have a follow-up question or comment. We can certainly do that. Apologies, Dr. Sherber, for cutting off, but I don't know if we need some clarity for the.
No,
Yeah.
I think we're good.
Okay.
Sure.
So basically, if we could just explain what our process is for determining students potentially who are in the pipeline. Once they are coded, how do we evaluate through annual IEPs? I think they just want to hear how do we stay compliant with doing what we say we're supposed to do for those students who are coded as special ed.
So for individual students, the simplest response to that is we look at their IEP goal progress monitoring and we, see how they're performing. As a team, we meet, we review, we make adjustments accordingly. In terms of evaluating, that's for an individual program for a student. In terms of evaluating the large scale program, every 6 years we do the Pennsylvania Department of Education cyclical monitoring, which has upwards of 30 different areas that we have to provide data on, and board policy, as Mr. Faust mentioned, and some other items. They come on site, they review files, they visit our schools, they interview our students who are 14 and older, they interview families, teachers, we do surveys. And then every 3 years, as Mr. Faust mentioned, we have the special ed plan in which we have to address at least 5 different areas: literacy instruction, professional development, transition, paraprofessionals, and autism in particular. In addition to having to provide data on, the amount of time our students spend in the regular education environment, and other things like that. So it's a really prescribed methodology of information that we have to fill in, and that gets presented to our school board and our community as we go.
I understood the question to be, is there a tool or a document? And I think Allison just hit on that. There is a formatted plan. And again, every 3 years, we must complete that plan with the involvement of the public and the board. So the department is looking for very specific categories of information, and much more comprehensively every 6 years, as part of the monitoring that is done by the Department of Education, we're required to complete what is called a facilitated self-assessment, which is about an 80-page document broken down into multiple categories that requires us to identify all manner of practices and procedures, including our child find process, our evaluation process, and our programming.
So we know that the comprehensive plan is one that can be found online, but the facilitated internal plan that we do every 6 years, is that something that is also able to be found?
Yes, that is a public document. We maintain our FSAs, as they're known, as does the department.
So I just wanted to put that out for the individual that posed that question. And I would say that if you need guidance or direction with accessing any of that documentation, to reach out to our Office of Special Education.
Thank
And
you. Thank you all. I saw we had a hand.
yes, I'm trying, Keith, in our Zoom room, can you unmute Jeree Pickney?
And if you could, for the record, let us know where in the district you reside when you begin speaking. Thank you.
Hello, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm Shree. I currently live in Cheltenham and my son goes to Winco Elementary. So I just wanted to follow up on that question that I posed in the chat. So my child is in an autistic support program, and this is the second year he's in the autistic support program. So essentially, like, we're in the midst of that, in the midst of the transition from the IU to Cheltenham District taking over the autistic support services for the district. So the reason why I pose that question is because my child is a child he's on the spectrum, and he also has ADHD, and he has issues as far as behaviors. It has been very challenging, to say, this first half of the school year with behaviors from my child, and also to the environment in the class. And being transparent, there's been a lot of changes. Mr. Taylor has been really, really great in trying to help through this transition and make these changes, but there's behavior issues going on in the class with all of the children, from staff not necessarily being trained in managing our children's behaviors, and that's a problem. So, again, like, my child, I mean, he's doing great now, but there's still some struggle in this classroom from staff that are not necessarily, not saying that they're not doing a great job. I mean, like, Dr. Beasley, she's doing amazing. She's trying to, come up with, I know, like, she's trying to come up with the behavior, I guess, like, everybody's, like, behavior plan on the IEPs and all that good stuff, whatever. But again, like, if you're not necessarily having, like, trained staff to carry out what you are putting in to support these kids, like, that's an issue. So, and again, like, we've already went through a lot of changes, and, like, the IU, like, from having staff that were essentially, like, trained in behavioral support to, or I should say, I take that back, like, at least not necessarily having these behavior interruptions in the class, or disruptions in the class, or as many, to, like, we're having some issues this year, and, like, everybody's trying, and everybody's, trying to do, the best job. But again, it gets to the point where, I understand, like, in individual IEP meetings, like, we'll have it to where, like, those things are determined, but it's like, when is it going to be a point where we have to make the decision, and, like, maybe we need to, like, have a different approach, or maybe we need to, like, look at this staffing model to better support our children, and support the educators as well, like, support, our autistic support teacher, Ms. Buckner. Like, how are we going to, when are we going to get to the point where we can actually be able to, give everybody the tools they need to be successful?
So do we want to speak to what training they have been exposed to?
Yeah, surely. So hi, this is Jacqueline DeJown-Vittorio. I'm actually one of the supervisors of special education, and I oversee the AS program for the district. So we have actually had opportunities for staff to engage in training that was very specific to students with autism. So during our professional development days in the months of October and November, the AS staff were specifically held into part of a group that was run by training by myself and Dr. Brown Beasley, as well as paraprofessionals have received training for behavior supports and other topics as well during the early dismissal days on Wednesdays for each month. Oh yeah, and then additionally, Dr. Brown Beasley and myself both visit the buildings and are in the AS classrooms every week.
So I don't want to take this opportunity to get into a tit for tat. I heard you very clear questioning whether staff was trained or not. And I simply wanted to give an overview of what training has been provided. I would ask Ms. Pickney if there are specific issues which you have knowledge of pertaining to your child, or if there are other parents that are having issues, that they simply reach out to our special ed department. We just recently had a meeting with SEEK, and we meet with them quite consistently, and have encouraged them to let parents know to contact us directly so that we can address whatever issues or concerns there may be. So again, I see your hands up, and by all means, you can have the floor again, but I don't want this to be the forum where we try to solve what is specifically happening at WinCode. But know that if you reach out, we will address it. The floor is yours again. I see you have your hand up.
No, I didn't put it up twice. No, that's totally fine. I know this is a bigger issue, but this isn't just at Wincote, this is at Myers as well.
Okay. And again, if you have specific parents that are having concerns, and that's what we've encouraged. I'm not trying to sweep anything under the rug. We need to know what's happening. So if there's things that are happening or not happening, please bring it to our attention so that we can address it. That's where we need this to be a fluid partnership. So we know where the concerns are and what resources of support we need to galvanize to make sure that the needs are being met.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. I didn't want to assume that there was more coming, but we will appreciate the responses and appreciate your willingness to dialogue with our administration and us tonight. We will, are there any other, did anything else come up in the chat or Q&A as we were talking?
There are no other hands raised. I don't know if Yvonne wanted to say anything. Oh, sorry. Let me just scroll down. She just indicated that her initial question was more about the overall program, not individual students. And how is the district doing overall educating the students who have an IEP? So she's saying that was her question initially. How are we evaluating the overall special ed program?
Yes, I think that, again, Allison made, I think, fairly clear too, that again, on a triennial basis, we're required to revisit our entire plan and look at efficacy. When we do that, the public is involved in that process. And then every 6 years through the facilitated self-assessment, we again are doing a much more detailed review of efficacy of what's going on, including looking at individual students as a sample to see that they're making progress year to year to year in the program.
And if I could just add, it's hard to answer this question without looking at each individual student, because it's important that we're meeting the need of each individual student. And when stuff comes up to my level and to the degree in which it comes to my level, it's an indicator for me that there is a gap in how services are being provided, which then has me do a deeper dive in terms of asking questions around what is or is not happening, especially when it comes to issues around compensatory services being asked for. So it kind of goes hand in hand and is a very fluid process. We are currently in a position where we've lost our director. That position is being posted. We will be having an interim coming in. And I recognize there's work that needs to be done in our Office of Special Ed. I think there's individuals that are being overrepresented. This is part of the reason why I'm really trying to put an emphasis on beefing up our MTSS program. Because if that program is strong, we can head off some of the representation or over-representation that's being seen. So let's keep this dialogue going, because by no means are we where we need to be.
I don't see any hands raised at this time, or any other questions in the Q&A.
Sorry to interrupt. There is one more hand raised. Lisa Hesbacher.
Thank you. Can you unmute her?
Hi, good evening, everyone. This is Lisa Hesbacher. I'm a resident of Wyncote, and I'm co-chair for the Special Education Alliance of Cheltenham, as you know. My question is actually directed to Mr. Faust tonight, and I'm just going back to the conversation that Cherie Pinckney raised with regard to the use of an RBT in the autism support classrooms versus paraprofessionals. And I was just hoping, Mr. Faust, you could clarify the difference between what you had termed a behavior specialist versus the role of a BCBA, a board certified behavior analyst, versus a behavior tech, versus a building aide or a classroom aide, and how that relates to the role of an RBT, which is a registered behavior technician. Because I think there's a lot of, I think there's a lot of confusion around this aspect. And my understanding is that, different roles, they all sort of work together, but that each person has a defined role. And I think there can be different terms used for the same thing. So if you could just kind of give us some clarity on that, I would appreciate it.
For us legally to what is recognized in our law as a certified or otherwise appropriate service for a child, and what is sort of a distinction that is recognized in the professional community that doesn't have a legal significance. Our law recognizes that we are able to and should be employing personal care assistants, PCAs, for students who need individual attention. And our Chapter 14 regulations have a very specific training regimen that is necessary for those individuals who are designated as PCAs. Our law also recognizes in the certification and staffing policy guidelines, those things that define areas of certification of professional employees, the existence of a behavior specialist, and that is generally the equivalent of a board certified behavior analyst. So board certified behavior analyst and PCA are the two legal distinctions that we have in Pennsylvania. The district does employ board certified behavior analysts and PCAs. The RBT is a form of somewhat more trained and qualified PCA. They are not a professional employee under Pennsylvania law. There is no mandate that we employ somebody denoted RBT. It's entirely possible that the unique training of an RBT may bring something to an individual child's program that neither a board certified behavior analyst or a PCA could, but that's the kind of decision. And I think this is what Allison Kutcher was indicating earlier. That's the kind of decision that has to be made kid by kid at the IEP team meeting. And I think you heard from Ms. Kutcher that the district is perfectly willing to consider on a child-specific basis whether the skill set that an RBT has, as distinguished from a board-certified behavior analyst or a PCA, may very well be something a child needs that has to be considered individually.
So my understanding, though, is that a BCBA would supervise an RBT, right? A BCBA or a behavior specialist would be the person that's creating the plan, the behavior plan for the team. And then the RBT or the building aide would actually implement the plan with the student. Is that correct?
It's partly correct. You might be narrowing too much who is qualified under Pennsylvania law to create a behavior plan. A certified special education teacher can do that, and sometimes our special ed teachers do. A board certified behavior analyst can as well, as sometimes our school psychologists are responsible for and create behavior plans for us. An appropriately trained counselor could design a behavior plan. We would typically rely on counselors to do that for much simpler cases, but that's also possible. But you are correct that then that plan is implemented often by paraprofessional staff and most particularly a PCA, where an individual support is needed.
Okay, thank you for that clarification.
Yep.
Thanks for the continued participation tonight. This is as you heard earlier, this piece of policy would move forward for a first read at our next legislative board meeting. But if there are no other comments or questions at this time, I'll hand it back over to administration to move forward. 13.1.
All right, Keith, I want to make sure I don't see any more. Are there any hands up?
No, there aren't any more hands up.
Well, then we can move to the next policy, which is 113.1. And 113.1 is being changed to discipline of students with disabilities. So this is a new policy. It's up for discussion.
Again, this is the standard PSBA policy that has been mildly edited by me to more accurately reflect what the law requires. I think the board members are probably well aware that the requirements under federal law for exclusionary discipline of kids with disabilities are extremely complex, hyper-regulated, very detailed. This policy attempts to simplify broadly what that process should consist of.
Any questions or comments from board members? Mrs. Haywood?
Yes, thank you very much for that clarification in terms of the scope of the policy. I probably need some education with respect to suspension from school and changes in educational placement manifestation determinations. So I'm reading those two sections, and I'm reading the exception under for students with intellectual disabilities that any disciplinary suspension or expulsion is considered to be a change in educational placement. How do I read that in conjunction with prior section with respect to suspension from school? Are there any circumstances that a student with an intellectual disability, well, how am I reconciling those two sections? I just trying to read them.
Pennsylvania has a deep history of protecting the rights of individuals with disabilities. Some of you may know of the Park Consent Decree back in 1971. That actually brought special education to the world, and it was litigation that was initiated here in Pennsylvania. It was bought by the Pennsylvania Association of Retarded Citizens, which used to call students with intellectual disabilities. And special rules came out of that litigation that continue to exist today, that we have to layer on top of what federal law says. Federal law says that we can exclude kids with disabilities for up to 10 days consecutively, and serially more than that, up to the point that we reach a pattern of changing the child's placement by excluding them so often. But for kids with disabilities, that trigger is 1 minute. The minute that child has committed an offense and we want to exclude that child, we've triggered the obligation to do a manifestation determination to determine the link between that child's behavior and their disability. And we are precluded from excluding that child for even 1 minute if there is that connection, that manifestation is present.
Okay.
Yeah, if I may, it's an extra protection, like Andy said, right, as a result of that law that really got built in and has remained in chapter 14 in the state regulations.
Which is a good protection.
Yeah, and there is a way also, I'm assuming it still exists, that you can, if you would like to exclude a student with with an intellectual disability because you feel like they're, it's extraordinary circumstances that to keep them in school would be harmful to themselves or others, you can seek approval from the Pennsylvania Department of Education.
That's
To
right.
ask that the student be allowed to remove the student. I assume that still.
Yeah, it does still exist, although they're sparingly granted and seldom sought, but that is very true. It's also, I should point out, that there is an exception that is common to all students with disabilities, including students with intellectual disability, and that is if they commit a drug offense, a weapons offense, or inflict serious bodily injury, even a child with intellectual disabilities can be excluded for up to 45 days to an interim alternative placement. you'll see that language reflected here in this policy.
Okay, yeah, I see that in the next section. And I remember, and I think I asked this question before we review these policies. This is consistent with what's in our behavior policy just for the district.
We have, and we're going to review it tonight, a separate policy that governs behavior intervention, the development of positive behavior support plans based on functional behavior assessments. So that's another protection, of course, that we use to ensure that kids with disabilities are not being punished before they're supported when they're exhibiting learning interfering behavior.
Okay, thank you.
These two policies work in tandem.
Okay, thank you.
Sloan?
I mean, I know that trying to capture this in a 2-page document is nearly impossible. So I appreciate the effort. I think I just had a couple little typo things that I'll give to you, Adrienne. There's at one point it says free and appropriate education. It's just free appropriate education. There's a couple of other little typo things. I mean, the one thing that I would suggest, I know this is PSBA language, but just to try to make it a little more understandable, under suspensions from schools, a student with a disability may be suspended for up to 10 days consecutively. I would put in a row in parentheses behind consecutively. Yeah. Or for more than 10 days cumulatively, parentheses total, in any school year. Just for the non-lawyers who don't, stick their head in 300, codes and know what those words mean. I mean, I read that, I'm like, oh yeah, I know what that means, but like,
Sure.
right, when you, as a parent, you're trying to explain it to a normal person, you say, you can't be suspended for more than 10 days in a row, or for more than 10 days total, or 15 days if there's a pattern or something like that. So, I don't know, those would be my suggested changes to try to demystify that a little bit. Then beyond that, this is just complicated stuff. Yeah, like I said, I just have a couple of other little those. I mean, this is not the plate. This, I know we're setting policy here. I mean, if we were really looking to be helpful, to staff and students with this type of information, do we have administrative regulations or a special education manual or something that's a bit more user friendly that would, be provided with this to sort of operationalize it?
I don't believe anything like that exists, so that would be something we have to look at.
Okay.
Is there a special ed manual?
No.
So that's something to be taken under consideration.
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of stuff on the internet now that people can find and all that other stuff, but for us to have, to know it's correct and to know that this is what, we're following internally as a district, and also let families know that this is what we're following, I think is also extremely helpful, useful, and all of that kind of stuff, to set our expectations too as well, because we can also go above and beyond what federal law and state law might require in terms of, what our expectations are, so.
We don't have yield the rest of my time or anything like that. So I'm wondering. But appreciate it. And that was actually one of my questions as well. Were there are there ARs that are coming along? Sounds like maybe not. If I guess from a policy perspective, similarly to Mr. Taylor's question, like this change in educational placement, could you just add some context to like what the implications are?
Yeah, it's a strange idea, really. We're not allowed to change a child's educational placement without following the process and procedures recognized in the IDEA. Many, many years ago, the Office of Civil Rights in the U.S. Department of Education said, hey, when you're putting a child with a disability out of school for extended periods of time, you're in effect changing that child's educational placement. They're no longer getting their free, appropriate public education. And because you're doing that, you have to make sure either that the reason you're doing it doesn't have to do with the child's disability, or you have to make sure that you are getting consent from the parents to do that. So that's why we reached this important, we sort of came up with 10 days as the magic number. When you exceed 10 days, that child has been out so long that you've effectively changed the effectiveness of their program.
Which that is prohibited. And that's what I didn't want to answer my own question, but it's literally a connection to every child's right to that free appropriate education.
Correct.
And a change in placement really doesn't honor that.
That's right.
That's right.
So, Mr. Epps, if I could just ask to add on to that, would it be helpful to, and it may be too complex of a concept, but would be helpful if there's a definition of a change in educational placement under the law that could be added in this policy? I think would help explain to a layperson for this area of the law. Like myself, as a lawyer, I can understand some things, but not things I have no knowledge of.
That's right. No, that does make perfect sense. I had together with Ed Diazio and see if we can come up with something that's readable.
Because it has a long, actually, because it's not just for discipline either. You can have a change in educational placement if you're proposing. This probably wouldn't know, we can talk about it later, but like if you're proposing to change a child's placement to a less restrictive environment or more inclusive environment, or you're looking to propose major changes to the specially designed instruction portion of their IEP. Like there's it's like really a term of art. Like it's kind of so it has particular implications for discipline, but it also has implications in other ways.
Right, that's a good way to put it. I mean, we change kids' educational placements for all different reasons in all different ways. It's just that the federal law asks us to consider disciplinary exclusion to be one of those ways that we change their placement.
Context. We'll go to any members of the public. Questions, comments, thoughts on policy 113.1.
I don't see any hands raised. There's no Q&As either.
All right, we will move forward in our agenda. And so I'll hand it back over. So that 113.1 will also move forward for first read at our next legislative board meeting. And we'll move forward to 113.2.
Yes, 113.2 is behavior support.
This is one of the two policies I told the board at the start we're required to have in place by the Pennsylvania Department of Education. When they monitor us, they want to see this. This policy, again, it's the PSBA's model, but it derives all those verbatim from section 14.133 of the regulations of the State Board of Education, as it's required to do.
We'll open up to comments from the board. I did have just one more like policy level question as well around the independent evaluations. I know in other cases when I guess a non-employee of the district performs some service to students, they're still bound by like the policies and the regulations that we have in place to it largely. And so wondering, is this a case where we would have like another contract, if there's an independent evaluator or any kind of third party, is that a case where we'd have like a contract in place that then still binds them to some of these same regulations and policies?
We could. I will say there's a variety of ways that we end up retaining individuals to do independent evaluations. Parents have an absolute right to demand an independent educational evaluation. And by the way, this is actually covered by the next policy, 113.3. We can put certain restrictions on that policy, that independent evaluation, which is why we have the policy. We can require that the independent evaluator's evaluation comply with our policies, what we expect our own people to do when they evaluate, which is why we have the policy. But
Actually had that written, I meant to ask that as part of point 3.
Hey, I'll jump all over.
Yeah, right. good win. So I already have that one answered. So appreciate that. Sounds like yes and yes. All right, good. So we'll move that to open it up. Oh, Mrs. Loman.
I just wanted to say about the behavior support policy. I know it does come almost verbatim from state regulations, which is why I don't really have a lot to say about it because it is what it is. I mean, from a school district perspective, from a policy perspective, I mean, I would probably have liked a little bit more language at the beginning to, refer to the fact that, we support, use of positive behavior, interventions for all of our students. And, and we recognize that it's important to create a, positive educational climate. And there's, something along those lines, because then we go jump right into aversive techniques and seclusion and, restraints and all of those things we're hoping to avoid using. And maybe making that clear that, all of these things really are, and the state regulations sort of try to, they're options of last resort, really in many cases. You'll never have to use them for students. So, especially the one about seclusion, I know it's from the state regs, but man, it's really rough, especially when it's okay to seclude a kid and not have an adult in the room with them. I mean, we could actually do better than that. So I put that out there as more of a just global, it is what it is, but.
Well, if I could say that the recommended policy from PSBA actually did have preparatory language, which I got rid of.
Okay.
Largely because it was going in the wrong direction. It read like this: students with disabilities shall be educated in the least restrictive environment in accordance with their individualized education plans and shall only be placed in settings other than the regular education class when the nature and severity of the student's disability is such that the education in the regular classroom cannot be achieved satisfactorily. So it's reading from the LRE.
Yeah, that's LRE.
It doesn't have anything to do with it. So I got rid of that, which maybe makes it a bit of a harsh beginning. I think it would make sense that the board came up with its own preparatory language favoring positive and supportive interventions with kids with disabilities.
So I would probably offer two recommendations. One, under the authority section, it does talk about that the district's behavior support program is based on positive rather than negative behavior. As well as there's a cross-reference to 218, which is the student discipline policy, which I do believe has good preparatory language.
Yeah.
That we could draw from and add to either the purpose or the authority section.
Yeah, thank you. That's what I was thinking was the language from 218. Yeah.
Thank you. Regarding this policy 113.2, I'll open it up to members of the public.
Okay, currently, I don't, yes. Rebecca Condick. Keith, can you unmute her, please?
And if you could share I recognize, I know you attended our meetings before, but if you could share your where you reside in the community as part of your statement, thanks.
Yes, so I'm Rebecca Condit. I live in Elkins Park. One thing that I noticed, and I understand it sounds like a lot of the wording in this came from the state laws maybe, but one thing that struck me is all these different terms are defined near the beginning of this policy. But one of the terms it doesn't define is the terminology that's used that actually justifies when restraints and seclusion can be used, which is it's talking about, when it's talking about when the student is acting in a manner that presents a clear and present danger to the student, other students, or employees. It doesn't actually say what justifies that. I mean, what counts as that. Whereas in the other policy, when it was talking about sending children to a different facility for up to 45 days, I don't remember the exact wording, but it actually defined, very clearly, like there was one part in there about bodily harm, and it actually defined exactly like what was meant by bodily harm. And I feel like this is very subjective when a student is acting in a manner that presents a clear and present danger to that student, other students, or employees, right? Because I guess maybe this is an example where having administrative regulations could be helpful also, but I feel like, in the moment when teachers and paraprofessionals are trying to deal with a behavioral situation that's happening, it's too easy, right, for people to say, well, there was a clear and present danger. I think we would want there to be more of a definition of what really constitutes that.
There are a lot of head nods. I don't know if you can see on the screen, but if does anyone want to?
No, I'm just taking notes, Rebecca, and definitely something we'll revisit and bring back prior to the first reading or during the first reading.
Thank you.
So it's being taken under consideration.
Thank you.
Did you say there was a second hand? That was Keith.
No.
Yeah, I think you said Keith.
Oh, yes, we have, Lisa, Lisa, your last name, Hashbacker, if I'm saying it correctly. Yes, Lisa has her hand up. She's been unmuted.
Hi, that was close. Lisa Hessbacher. I know it's a tough one, so I appreciate the attempt. So I'm a Winco resident, if I have to repeat that again. So the comment, and I echo everything of what Rebecca just mentioned. I think that it's really important for us to have a really clear understanding for everyone of what constitutes that clear and present danger aspect, and utilizing restraint as a measure of last resort. And I think also keeping in mind the traumatic impact that can have to a student as young as a kindergarten student. So we're talking about, a 5-year-old potentially being restrained, being secluded in a room by themselves, potentially having the door held against their will, feeling scared and not really knowing what's happening. And yet in that moment, they're being asked to regulate themselves. So I think, when we're looking at topics like seclusion and restraint, I think we want to be looking at that through the lens of, what is in the best and most safe measure for the student as well as the staff. And I think we also need to be considering that student's emotional well-being and, how we're supporting them through this experience, because, as I think most people know by now, any type of behavior is really communication, right? It's a communication of an unmet need or a skill that's still being developed. So if that child in that moment is struggling, and this could be a child of any age, and this could be a child of, with an ability to speak very articulately, or for a non-speaking child, I think that we always want to look first from the lens of their well-being as well as the well-being of others. So I hope that, all aspects of this particular policy and the other policies we're looking at tonight are taking that into consideration. Another thing I wanted to ask is, my understanding is that there is Pennsylvania DOE guidance on something called CASEL competencies around social emotional learning. And I'd like to know, where we are in the process of ensuring those practices, and how we're evaluating that within the framework of these policies.
So that's a great question. I know you guys just had a meeting. I'm not sure if that question was brought up during your meeting, but I can circle back and get that information. It's not something.
It wasn't raised, Dr. Scriven, because we weren't even aware that these policies were being evaluated this evening. We were made aware of that recently, and we appreciate that we were given an opportunity to be present tonight, but we did not know this when we met last Friday.
Okay, thank you for that. And I'll circle back to see how we're currently implementing those competencies.
Great, thank you.
Thanks. Any other members of the public desiring to share?
I don't see any hands raised, and there are no Q and As.
So I understand at the very least that the request is that Ed Diazio, perhaps with my support, write a preparatory statement for this policy. Makes clear that we favor positive and proactive support for students before we use restraint.
Correct.
Okay.
And some clarity around what constitutes restraint or seclusion and that clear and present danger. Just elaborate.
Although I don't, I may be glossing this, I'm not seeing the words clear and present danger used in here. Is it? They're physical restraint. Physical restraint, okay. First paragraph. I see.
Yeah, it's
Clear and present
immediate-
danger to the student or other students, gotcha.
immediate or imminent injury.
So consider the definition of that phrase. Okay.
Certainly appreciate the feedback and suggestions. We will,
We
Oh,
have
there's-
2 hands up.
oh, okay, thank you.
Cherie Pinckney. Can you unmute her, please?
Hi, I'm sorry. I'm Cherie, again from Cheltenham. And just if we are, so kind of like circling back to what I was saying before about training, it's the reason why because this policy exists. If we're changing the policy and like the verbiage of like what defines excessive force, or like, you know, what is going to actually like determine what you know, where the use of restraint is appropriate, can we also to put in a policy in like what training is going to be provided for people who are essentially going to need to know this and be able to, you know, implement these things, or, you know, be able to understand what needs to be done in these type of situations?
Yes, so under other policies that would go under the AR, I need to get clarity as why there are no ARs under these policies. So I need to see how to best address that request, but it is something that I've definitely noted, and we'll figure out how we need to address this.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
And we have one more.
Yes, can you, Lisa again? Lisa, you're
Hi.
unmuted.
Yes, thank you. It's Lisa Hessbacher again, Wincoat. So my understanding is that the district collects data and has a data monitoring report that's submitted to, I think, the state annually. And that's done, I believe, in December. Is it possible to request to have that report published on that would allow the public to understand the incidences of isolation, seclusion, and restraint being used in the district?
I will definitely take that under consideration, Lisa.
The
Okay,
district, the state maintains a database that the district is required to report into. It's called the RISC database. And information concerning restraint goes in there, I believe, on a quarterly basis. The RISC data are public and can be acquired from the state. So it's a mass together by district.
Mrs. Haywood.
And I, just to go back to the last question from the last community member, there's language in the policy that we're looking at right now that does talk about regular training and retraining of staff and the use of specific procedures, including de-escalation techniques, emergency responses, restraints and seclusions that will be used to implement positive behavior supports or interventions in accordance with the student's IEPs and our positive support plans and board policy. So I just wanted to point that out, it is supported in the language and the policy, the training.
Exactly where I was going as well. So appreciate that. All right, looks like that. All right, so and that was policy 113.2. And so we will move forward with 113. That will also, 113.2 will also move forward for first read at our next legislative board meeting. And I'll hand it back over to Ed.
One question. Prior to it going to the board agenda, do you want first to propose to add that additional language in the beginning? Okay,
I understand the board's asking us to do, right?
correct.
Okay. So that we may have that is essentially what you're saying. We may need more time than the 2 weeks. Is that where you were going? Okay, cool.
But just that it's shared first.
Gotcha.
Otherwise,
That it's shared.
happen after.
Changes.
Mhm.
All right, we'll move forward to 113.3.
Okay, 113.3 is screening and evaluations for students with disabilities. This is a new policy.
And half of this policy, as I've already indicated, is required. We're required to have a policy covering when we will support and pay for independent educational evaluations. In order to define what an evaluation is, we also have to have the first part of the policy, which defines how our staff will conduct evaluations.
Open it up for comments from the board. Mrs. Haywood.
Yeah. So as it relates to the assessments and the evaluation, we include on the, I guess it's the 3rd page of the policy, that we would not make those assessments based on any discriminatory basis, like racial or cultural basis. Perhaps we should broaden that to include all the prohibited categories of discrimination that are not limited to just race and culture, ethnicity, sex, sexual orientation, etc. In that section. That's what I would offer. What would you come into? And then the other comment I have is that we should also add a cross-reference equity policy. I think that was the only one that did not cross-reference that.
You know, just so I have it in my mind, if I'm going to be helping Mr. Biasio with this. What section is the
language that I just.
Yeah, about the non-discrimination. I know it's in there, but I just want to be able to find it.
So it's under appropriate evaluation.
Right.
It's on mine, it's the 3rd page, the second full paragraph, starting with all assessment.
Got it. Yeah. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Other comments from board members? Ms. Loman?
These 2 questions are going to actually be related to the fact that, you know, at least currently we don't have an AR or a special ed. Maybe we'll sort of flesh some of this out. The first one, the board shall adopt a system of screening. Have we done it? I don't know.
What was the question?
The very first under authority, it says the board shall adopt a system of screening that may include early intervening services when required by law and must be designed to accomplish identification and initial screening for students prior to district referral for special education evaluation. I think that is our, you know, sort of what the response to intervention, or perhaps what we're talking about in TSS. But because this is such broad language from PSBA taken directly from the IDEA, It doesn't really, it's not really helpful, I think, in any one way or another, because it doesn't really say what our policy of screening might be to identify kids prior to them, prior to referral for special education evaluation. So I don't know if we have a policy currently that we want to refer to, or one that's coming up for consideration.
Oh, that's a great question. Is there currently a policy?
No, really, I do think, Jenny, you hit on it. All that Chapter 14 mentions is vision and hearing screenings of the sort that the nurses do regularly. We don't get much guidance from our own law, nor do we from the IDEA, other than a broad reference to RTII, our response to intervention and instruction, which isn't helpful either. Its modern manifestation is multi-tiered system of supports, and you just mentioned that. I know the district is working to put in a consistent multi-tiered system of supports. I'm not sure where we are on that. And I'm not sure, given that it is a very particularized form of intervention, that we could be very prescriptive as a board. I mean, that's your decision, of course, in saying exactly what MTSS will look like, each tier of intervention.
Yeah, I just put that out there because maybe we could have something not very specific, but a little bit more specific than saying that we will adopt a policy of a system of screening, or maybe putting that, for future consideration, even to say, once we have something in place, this is what we our policy is moving forward in terms of what screening is going to look like.
I've got it noted, so we'll circle back on that.
So that's one. And then the other one is right above the one that Ms. Haywood had pointed out, the paragraph beginning, when assessing the presence of a specific learning disability, the evaluation shall be consistent with procedures adopted by the district and comply with state and federal law and regulations. Again, I know language out of Chapter 14 and the IDA, but and I know that we have in the 3-year special ed plan that they just passed, that we say we use the discrepancy model of identification. I don't know if we need to reference that here or, flesh that out a little bit more so that when people are looking at this policy, they'll say, aha, they're using the discrepancy model. I don't know, but, as there's all sorts of, I'm going to the quality of whether or not that's a good model to use, but.
I think the only thing that presents is that you are then bound to open up the policy again versus if you put an AR. You could write those.
Well, that was, yeah, exactly. I agree precisely that it really should be in an AR. Yeah. So I just throw that out there as well.
Appreciate that. We'll open it up to comments and thoughts from members of the public. Let's see.
Oh, and just, may I say one more other thing, just about the general kind of housekeeping for these policies? Would it make sense to have the special ed policy, be the first one, and then have screening and evaluation be the second one? And then have behavior support be the third one, and then have discipline be the fourth one?
These are PSBA's numbering system.
Okay.
You can do whatever you want.
Okay.
I appreciate the sequencing.
Okay. Just in terms of, okay, you know where I'm going with it. All right.
If you want to, can you email me?
Yep.
Yeah. Email comment.
So I
Yeah, right.
do not see any hands.
Thanks. And that's more in line with your broader point around the commitment to, inclusion and equity. Certainly support that. All right, that would bring this item to a close, and pending any changes, this will also move forward for first read at our next legislative board meeting in February. That brings us to a close for our agenda items for tonight for new business. And so I will await a motion to adjourn.
Second.
I was like, what? That looked like a inquisitive face. I was like, what? We have a motion and a second, and so the meeting is now adjourned. Thank you for members of the public for attending tonight.